Ladies and gentlemen, you are now entering the Decent Christian Talk podcast. Enjoy.
Decent Christian Talk, episode number 117.
117.
Hey guys, I'm Gabe Jones.
I'm Josiah. You almost forgot your name there.
I did. And this is a show by the fans.
For the fans.
And we've got a great show for you today because this is a collaboration episode that I've been looking forward to for so long.
You could say that you've been chasing this episode for a while.
I'm going to admit, I'm freaking out here.
What?
Because Chase Tremaine from the Jesus Freak Hideout podcast is joining us, and he's actually got music that has come out. He's actually released his second album that just came out a few weeks ago, and it is an incredible album. You don't want to miss it. It's called Development and Compromise. It is already one of my favorite releases of this year, even though this year is not very long yet, but it's on the list of my favorite albums so far, and I'm excited to talk with him today.
I am also excited because I've not got to hear this one yet. This is fresh off the press.
Yes, just released, and it's a really great album. It's his second release. His first release came out just last year. It's an album called Unfall. He's only got 8 more releases before Josh Blog can make a top 10 post about him.
I'm excited to see where Josh Blog puts him in, all these.
Yeah, he's got to have a list of Chase Tremaine, at least ranking.
I think he just hears new music and he immediately opens up a blog page and starts to write.
I need to make a list about this. Okay.
Where does Chase Tremaine rank among Disney movies?
What?
He puts out some weird lists.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so you can support our page at our podcast at patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. For as low as $1 a month, you can join our team, and you can get great stuff such as bonus episodes. We got a great bonus episode that just came out where we talk about the debut of Third Day. You don't want to miss that. The debut turned 25 years old this year, so it's a great time to look back at that album and talk about it and reminisce a little bit. What are some things that you're looking forward to when we're talking about that?
I think that many people have heard of Third Day, but much like many of these headline bands that are super famous for whatever reason, maybe going through their origin story and going back to where I believe they were a little bit more in the rock phase of their development is exciting for me because that's my phase of development.
Yes, and I'm excited to get into that, and you can check that out again at patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. Hey, we are so excited to talk with Chase Tremaine today. I have been a fan of the Jesus Freak Hideout podcast since its inception. It is the best Christian music podcast out there, along with ours, hopefully, if you want.
I mean, you're on this show, so it definitely can't be as good as Jesus Freak Hideouts.
Well, thank you very much. But Chase does a really great job, and Scott with Jesus Freak Hideout podcast, I know he helps put those together, and we will honor those that we think do a great job. We have great respect for them, and we're so excited to talk with Chase. We're talking about his new music, we're talking about the podcast, and we're talking about kind of his beginnings, and if you will. So if you don't know much about Chase, this is the place for you. Without further ado, here is our interview with Chase Tremaine.
All right, hit that horn, babe. Let's dance.
All right, so I'm here with Chase Tremaine, the infamous Chase Tremaine from the Jesus Freak Hideout podcast. Finally together, double trouble here.
That is me.
The Fading West Bros.
Yeah, bringing together two podcasts that are very obviously named after DC Talk things.
Right. Yeah, so
it had to happen eventually.
Had to happen. And maybe this is the first of many to come. Who knows?
Yeah, we'd love to have you on JFH sometime.
Sweet. Hopefully sometime we can actually do this in the same room when everything's...
Oh, that's always ideal.
When everything is normal again, if there is such a thing. So I don't know a whole lot about you. I know you basically from the podcast at first. That's where I quote unquote met you. So I don't really know a whole lot about like your background, where you came from. I know you live in Nashville now, but where are you from originally?
Yeah, born and raised in Arlington, Texas, which is right between Dallas and Fort Worth. So that's where I lived most of my life. I did also attend college in Arlington, and it was about a year and a half after graduating from college that my brother and I moved here to Nashville, relocated, mostly for musical reasons. A lot of my musical experience comes with my brother. I've been his drummer, his guitarist, his bassist. I learned a lot from him. He took me under his wing when I was very new to guitar, and I learned basically how to sing harmonies from him, a lot of style things from him. But we just never had any luck in the Dallas-Fort Worth music scene. The genres were very constrained there. If you weren't Americana, or like the new age folk, you weren't going to get anywhere in Fort Worth. Or country, I guess. And Dallas did okay for kind of the washed up metal scene and for the incoming like EDM DJ scene. But we just didn't fit into any of that. So we thought moving into a place that was a little more writing oriented, a little more pop oriented would be good for us. So we packed up and came here, and then got totally distracted. We played for a different band together. This like alt metal band where he was the drummer and I was the bassist and screamer. And that was like where most of our musical stuff came from during our first year in Nashville. But we never really got into the songwriting scene and the writers' rooms and writers' rounds like we thought we would. He ended up getting married and now having a kid, and I got really focused on church and like the community I was building here. I was raised Christian. Would say that God saved me around age 5, and so that obviously bleeds into everything I do. But yeah, there was just that period of time where that everything I do just really wasn't particularly musical, other than just writing a song every now and then. And so it was after a short stint attending seminary and realizing that wasn't the right path for me, and that it didn't bring very good things out of me and my heart. A lot of pride and intellectualism festered really quickly in that setting. So I dropped out of seminary, and when I got kind of that no from God is when I also really thought that he was giving me a yes to pursue music again. And so that's when I got into a studio and recorded Matter and a few other songs that would eventually become my debut album that came out a year ago.
Sweet.
So it's been a roller coaster.
So, you just mentioned a lot of genres there. And so tell me, like, what did you grow up with listening to? You say you grew up in the church. What are some things that you grew up with that made you fall in love with music, but also influenced what you do now?
Yeah, it's funny because on a surface level, what I do now and a lot of what I've done over the past 15-ish years has been rock music. A few exceptions here and there, but I wasn't raised on any rock music at all. You might think from a 90s kid growing up in Texas that either there was a lot of country or a lot of classic rock, and there's absolutely neither of that. My parents don't care for either of those genres, and they had a few rules against like listening to some of the modern stations, the type of stuff where you get bad influences. I remember getting my brother in trouble once because he was listening to Kiss FM. But I never even really had a draw towards those things. I was very content in the two primary genres that I was raised in. One being the 90s CCM of the day, your Newsboys, DC Talk, Michael W. Smith, Stephen Curtis Chapman, that whole crew. And then the other side of it was the pop music that my parents were raised on. So kind of the golden oldies is usually how I refer to it. But like to this day, Barry Manilow is one of my favorite artists of all time. And he made my hands down favorite album of all time. And then, throughout that, just it's such a beautiful range of kind of pop, soft rock, R&B, whether it's like Frankie Valli and Four Seasons, Four Tops, Foundations, Earth, Wind and Fire, early Beatles, early Chicago, some Michael Jackson, like all that kind of stuff that would come up on those almost like AAA / easy listening stations, stuff like that. So that's really like the foundation of my musical listening. And even now, I think a lot of my melodic and lyrical sensibilities come from those influences and those genres. And I more so just color them with what I've gotten into since becoming a teenager and getting into, like in 6th, 7th grade, that was really when things exploded for me. And I became a big fan of Thousand Foot Crutch, Thrice, Emery, May, Joan Zeta. These bands that really kind of started cementing this new taste and these new directions for me. But some people, like when they get into like classic rock or something, it's almost like a rejection of whatever they were raised on. And I've never really had that. I've never really rejected any sort of like quote unquote phase that I've been through or anything. I still basically love everything that I've ever loved at any point in my life, which I'm really pleased with. So
even ska.
Never really had a ska phase. I definitely haven't gotten into everything. There are some genres that never really clicked for me, or some that like the artists that I like are very few and far between. Like ska and reggae are two genres that I've never really enjoyed on like a pure level. But there's a band called RX Bandits that like throws those together with some like prog metal, and it for me it works perfectly. So I try not to reject any genres wholesale, but
I understand. There's some that you just can't force down.
Yeah.
So there's always like a moment for anybody that gets into music. I know you said that you kind of followed your brother into music, but do you remember like when the time was when exactly that you were like, okay, this is kind of what I want to try doing?
Well, actually, it really is not only initially disconnected from my brother, but almost like actively trying not to follow in his footsteps. I have very early memories of trying to write songs. I have some very clear memories of like elementary school of rewriting or adding my own kind of verses and ideas to existing songs. I tried writing my own version of Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely, which just shows how foolish a kid can be to think that they can improve upon one of the greatest songs of all time.
Everybody tries that though.
Yeah. And then this is the air I breathe, like one of those like classic 90s vineyard worship songs.
Yeah.
I had my own version of that song as well. So like that goes back really far. And the earliest I can remember like writing my own songs from scratch. In 4th grade, I had a band, quote unquote, called Cross Carriers, which I almost can't believe isn't a real band.
That sounds like a 80s hair band right there.
Yeah. So Cross Carriers, with the hit songs, Jesus, My Savior, Lord, My God, and Day by Day, some of which there was totally some like rip-offs of DC Talk in there.
Of course.
But it was actually like DC Talk's rap never really affected me. It wasn't until like Thousand Foot Crutch came into the picture that I kind of got that rap-ish nu metal stank for a little bit. And that actually kind of like threw off my writing style for a little while, because I was always trying to write things in like a rap-ish style. I still have this lyric book somewhere in the mess of my bedroom with all of those old songs in it.
Oh, wow.
And like my earliest written songs. And I legitimately remember the melodies of some of these like very first songs I ever wrote. And when I'm reading them, I'm like, wow, like I had pretty decent theology for a fourth grader writing these worship songs. And then you get to the point where I switched from writing worship into writing like the rap rock, and everything just tanks, and it gets like so like silly and shallow. Like, man, well, it took a few years, but we rebuilt. So it felt very natural, independent. Like it's one of those things that, if I get to life circumstances where I'm just incapable of recording music professionally anymore, whether it's for lack of money or for lack of time, or even, potentially for lack of inspiration, I just can't ever imagine not writing music, because it's so naturally how I process the world, how I process experiences. I've even started joking that, like, if I learn a really important life lesson, or God teaches me something really big, I almost have to turn it into a song, or else I'm not going to remember it. Which, like, legitimately is where some of my songs come from. But it's been there for so long. And my brother has also been doing music for a while, and it's something that comes very naturally to him. It's like we both were just born with the bug. But he was primarily a guitarist when I was a kid growing up. And so I actually like ran away from the guitar for a long time because I didn't want to play the instrument that he played. I tried out drums and was really bad. I tried out bass and it didn't really click. I tried out piano, and even to this day, the piano makes no sense to me. Like, I understand it on a theory level, but my brain just cannot remember.
Yeah.
Like,
the hands.
What's D? What's A? What's G? I always have to like count it and figure things out really slowly. But guitar like just clicked, and everything made sense to me. The shapes and the patterns, and so I managed to kind of blast off as a guitarist pretty quickly. Definitely haven't put in enough practice over the years to be nearly as good as I theoretically could be, but in those early ages, it was strangely symbiotic. Like, oh man, this is just perfect for me. So been a guitarist since 8th grade, when I finally gave in and decided to try that instrument out.
So from one creative space to another, how did you get into podcasting?
Podcasting. I knew that this question was coming, and I've been trying to remember more clearly. I know that I really got into podcasts in late college, and post Serial, when podcasts became just something a lot of people did and loved. It was a joke with a lot of my friends, like, of what we would podcast about. But I finally kind of pinpointed what I think would be the roots. So 2015, I was very, very seriously working on launching a podcast that never happened about songwriting. 2015 was when I launched my song shop, where I write and record personalized songs for people. And the podcast was supposed to coincide that. And there was a period of time for about half of that year where like that was my main thing that I spent a lot of time on, was trying to make a sustainable business out of that, which just unfortunately never got off the ground and was too hard to price, and I had no built-in audience. Right. So the podcast never ended up releasing either. But that year, there was a podcast I was a big fan of called Off the Record, with hosts Zach Cirillo and Jesse Cannon. Jesse Cannon is a really fantastic producer up in the Boston area, and Zach Cirillo left the podcast, and Jesse had the idea of bringing on producers to help him like do interviews and help make content for future episodes. So for a season of time, I was one of the producers for that show, and I got to interview a handful of bands and artists, including Jesse from Falling Up, which was really cool. And so I got a lot of experience there and kind of figured out the technology behind it. So when I got hired on 2 years later in early 2017 to join Jesus Freak Hideout as a staff writer, it was just something about me that was kind of known, that I had some podcasting history. I had the equipment for it. I had the, audio editing skills for it. So in late 2017, they started asking around to a few different staff writers to try to get people to host and produce the show. And so it ended up originally being me and Mark Rice that we started recording episodes in late 2017 and then officially launched in February of 2018. So we're about to hit the 3-year mark of regularly releasing episodes. I now have a second podcast with one of my college roommates called Unlearning Ignorance that's been out for less than a year, and that's monthly episodes addressing like kind of divisive topics and trying to present different sides of those issues from kind of like balanced perspectives and pitting them against each other in an amicable conversation to try to facilitate civil discourse, which has kind of disappeared in a lot of our
what
society.
is that?
Yeah, I don't know. We've been trying to figure that out, and we're not there yet. So podcasting basically is a fairly big part of my life, but making podcasts is so time consuming. I don't know if you will relate to this at all. I'd be curious to know, but I just almost never listen to podcasts anymore.
Right.
I so much time just gets taken up making them that my love for podcasts has actually kind of disappeared in the process. There is a hilarious like comic book movie podcast from Australia called called The Weekly Planet. That is like the only thing I listen to anymore, and that's really just like if I'm on a drive and want a laugh, or if I want something to like put on a timer and fall asleep to, that's what I listen to. Otherwise, I basically have a podcast free life. Versus a few years ago when my life was so consumed with like 12 different podcasts that I listened to every single episode that I almost didn't listen to music anymore. So I made a very intentional shift there.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think a lot for me is sometimes I'll listen to just different formats just to get some ideas, and
Sure.
so like purely educational, but it's kind of like when you are making music, sometimes it's hard to listen to other music sometimes without becoming overly critical of what you're listening to. And like I know, like I've had past experience as a worship leader, and I've tried not to go into worship services that I'm not a part of and not tear it apart in my brain,
Oh, that's so hard for me.
And that's kind of what my mindset is when I listen to other shows now. So
yeah.
But so with Jesus Freak Hideout, like which is amazing, by the way. I don't ever tear that apart. You guys do such a great job. What has been some of the best or your favorite episodes that you've done? And I think I know a couple, but.
Yeah. Shoot. Well, my dream interviews of just like the two people that I really wanted to sit down with and to use this podcast as an excuse to do so were Steve Kabuchi from Wolves of the Gate, which shouldn't seem like too much of a big deal because he's super chill, and I've had conversations with him like before or after almost every Wolves concert I've attended. But just to like get to pick his brain for an hour was a lot of fun. The really big one was Stephen Curtis Chapman.
Right.
And I only got to sit with him for like 17 minutes, but it was still just like the best 17 minutes of my life. And I just loved getting to shower praise on the glorious unfolding for him, because like he's been working for years on new music, and I just wanted him to know from the bottom of my heart that this last album that he put so much of his life and heart into is loved by some people, and that his fan base isn't just fans of Dive.
Yeah.
So that was a very special occasion.
Does he believe that? Like, do you have to like convince him of that?
he I don't think he would ever say that, and he definitely like he has pretty well-rounded fans for the most part, I think. But I kind of just I expect that of most artists, that, like, I'm upset with the set lists of most of the bands that I go see because they're kind of forced by the larger amount of their fans to play the singles. And it's like, back in the days of concerts, there were some times where it almost felt like there's no need to see an artist more than once because you're going to get so many of the same songs.
Right.
And honestly, like, I kind of love all these like full album tours.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get a full album. But when, you're doing like a 15th anniversary full album tour, it's also kind of sad that, like, oh, people just want to hear the old stuff. And I always try to champion an artist's later work. And often, like, the artists that I listen to, their later albums are genuinely my favorite ones, or at least some of my favorite ones. But even when not, I try to do what I can to support the ongoing work of an album and not, put artists in a position where they feel like all of their fans just want the old stuff and don't care about the new stuff. So, yeah,
it's interesting to me sometimes when you talk to an artist that's reflecting and they're so hard on themselves, and it's hard for me to understand as just a fan, but I also understand it because I'm the same way with stuff that I do.
Yeah, right. But those are definitely some of my favorite interviews. Especially just like I would have loved those interviews regardless of what we talked about, just because of who I was talking to. But there's a few that have really surprised me. Like, I look back at, I think it was like episode 8. It was very early on. But sitting down with David Zock from Remedy Drive.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Like a really special one of my favorite early interviews. Every now and then I'll get on with someone that just really surprises me. And this wasn't as much of a surprise, but both episodes with Adam Watts were really great. I'm a massive Jesse McCartney fan, and Adam Watts wrote a huge chunk of his first 2 albums. And that's just, there's so many crazy intersections between him as this weird, dark indie Christian artist and also all this pop music he's done, which is just really cool. But a lot of my favorite episodes have just been with my co-staffers. And I know those are actually often some of our most popular episodes as well. Our most popular episode ever was with Chad from King's K, because they're just huge and have a big fan base that really eats that stuff up. But like the episode where we just debated the Switchfoot discography, that will forever be one of my favorites. Yeah. And it's really had long-term effects. A lot of the other staffers at the website loved the idea so much of going through the band's discography and talking about it, that almost everyone from the site following that episode went through Switchfoot's discography together. And then we ended up just making a Facebook group for a dozen of us to go through artist discographies together. And early on, it was specifically to kind of force us to go through the discographies of some of the biggest rock artists and Christian artists of all time. So we're talking, Beatles, U2, Radiohead, Stephen Kerr Chapman, Rich Mullins, those types. And it's now gone just super niche, and we just have this big pool of artists that we vote for, and it ends up being just us almost taking turns on favorite artists. So we just finished the Chevelle discography last week. We're doing the Mew discography this week. And it's so much fun. And that kind of all spawned from that Switchfoot episode, which I'm really thankful for.
That one is one of my personal favorites too. House of Heroes, that was good too.
I almost brought that one up. And I love Matt Lott, their old touring bassist. So getting to have him on the show was really cool.
Yes. That's quite the rundown. And you guys have had how many episodes now?
This week we're releasing episode 127.
Nice. That's awesome. So of course that brings us to why we are talking today, and that's you have a new album that's coming out.
I really
called
do.
Development and Compromise. And I have to say, before we even get into that, like Unfall, this is the follow-up to your first album, Unfall. And this is an album for me that I remember specifically listening to when the COVID outbreak happened. And my family would be spending so much time together. We actually had an 1,000-piece puzzle that we worked on for weeks. And I remember
that's awesome.
I remember I have vivid memories of listening to that album while putting that puzzle together. And you told me a story, and I don't know if you want to share it, but about Search for Myself, which ended up being one of my favorite songs from last year that you almost didn't put on that album, but you ended up putting it on at the last second. So basically, what I want to know is what did that? Why was it an early, like a late add-on, and why do you think people liked it so much?
Yeah, that was a really crazy one for me. I really didn't think people were going to like it, and I had it as track 2. And as we were getting closer and closer to the release, and as I had to finalize the album artwork and get everything pushed out for distribution and get CDs made, I started getting just like petrified, like to my core, that people were going to hate the song so much at track 2 that they just would stop the album and not listen to anything else. And it's still, like, looking back, kind of amazes me that the opposite happened, that it became like the viral hit of the album, that I basically had to like backtrack and call it a single, because it was the song that people were playing and putting on online radio and adding to playlists and such. And like, it just, the natural kind of growth that it had was outpacing all the other songs on the album. And I would like have friends that I hadn't spoken to in years hit me up on Facebook and say, "Hey man, Search for Myself, what a great song." And yeah, so much like really awesome things came from that song that, again, like I thought would have the opposite reaction. And I think it was mostly the lyrics that had me that scared, which I guess is a good sign. Like if I was writing something that was completely safe or sterile, or like safe for the whole family, then there would be no fear with putting it out. And Search for Myself was just, it's actually the only song on Unfall that's purely autobiographical. Most of the songs on that album are exploring kind of ideas or mixing real stories with fiction, or written about other relationships, not necessarily my own. And that one is just like 100% me, talking about my own journey in self-discovery and how my attempts to go down this path of self-discovery, and as like some psychologists would put it, like reconnect with my inner child or whatever, was just like dead ends, nothing but dead ends. It was actually one of the sweetest moments of that song was there's this one of the kindest ladies you'll ever meet is this like 80-year-old at my church, and she got my CD and was listening to it, and she came back like the next Sunday and found me at church and was like asking me about Search for Myself and like crying because she like took it in such a negative way. And it is a kind of a very negative song, but I always try to put in that like bit of hope. And the thing that, when read correctly, points to Christ. And yeah, she just, I don't know, like felt so sad for me in that song. Yeah, and once I was able to kind of separate myself from those fears and maybe realize that either one, people were connecting it, or two, people weren't reading into it as much as they thought they would. Because it's also one of the more blatantly Christian songs on the album, at least if you, if you're interpreting it the way I intended it. Search for Myself and Honest Tree are like the Christian pair of that album. And yeah, so just like stepping back from the lyrics, it's like, well, I guess it has like the album's like coolest guitar riff, catchiest chorus, interesting dynamics, acoustic part. Like it makes sense, like in retrospect. And I'm really thankful for it. But yeah, it was just so much like emotional turmoil in that. And I have songs on the new album that are kind of in a similar spot.
Yeah.
Like the two title tracks, basically. There's a song called Developments and a song called A Compromise. And they are both like songs that I was afraid to ever release, and just lyrically was afraid what people would think about them, how people would interpret about them, what I was like revealing to the world about myself through those lyrics. And instead, like from a lot of people who've heard the album so far, or actually technically both those songs are out as of recording this, like those are on the Bandcamp for pre-orders. Like those have been common favorites, and just kind of like, what? Has been my general reaction.
Do you think that it was easier for you to write those and put those on an album because of the success of Search for Myself? And like, do you think that this album, the success of Search for Myself, do you think that kind of gave you the confidence to put out those types of songs on the second album?
Not really. I mean, kind of, but learning lessons like that is hard. And I can look back at Search for Myself as a really great experience. But, Developments, Compromise, and whatever else are also like, different sides of me and different issues and different, topics being discussed. And they're also just weirder songs. They're not nearly as like straightforward pop friendly. Like those two songs in particular are so crazy in their time, like, or their key changes. They almost like don't make sense. But yeah, it was still a new, fresh kind of turmoil to have to go through. Like part of me like kept putting those songs like further and further back in the track list. And I finally had to come to a point where like, no, like I understand thematically what I'm doing on this album, and these songs have the exact spots thematically that they fit into. So I can't just like stuff them back in hopes that people won't hear them. Like I need them to be heard in the proper context for how I'm like formatting the themes of this album.
So speaking of albums, I know one of your favorite topics is like the concept of an album.
That's right.
Like releasing singles.
Yeah.
So when you were going into this album, what were some things that you wanted to say, and how did that end up turning out the way that it did? And why do you think it is important to have the concept of an album versus maybe just a couple of singles here and there?
Yeah. If anyone wants to kind of get into my thoughts about albums disconnected from my two albums, my friend Theo and I had a really great conversation about it on the JFH podcast back in August.
Yeah.
It's titled like Songs versus Albums.
Yeah.
Reliant K and Switchfoot, something like that. And yeah, it's an interesting thing because I think you can destroy an album if you focus so hard on the album that you aren't focusing on the songs first and foremost as their own standalone pieces. Like a perfect album conceptually, will die if its standalone songs aren't good. And I say that in relation to my own material because there isn't as much planning in these two albums as you might expect from someone like me who loves the format of the album so much, and is so thankful that the album has stood the test of time, and they kept telling us it wouldn't. As soon as iTunes arrived, they thought like, the album is dead, people are just going to buy tracks from here on out. You might see EPs, but you're mostly just going to see singles. And no, like, CDs are still big. Vinyl records have kept growing and growing and growing in sales. And we got the same rhetoric when Spotify came out, or your streaming services. And nope, like if anything, like, artists kind of just put out longer albums now. because streaming doesn't have the 44-minute limit of a vinyl record or the 80-minute limit of a CD, and you can boost your presence and boost your debut on the Billboard charts by just having a longer album that gets you more streams, which that's a different issue that I won't get into. But still, overall, I'm very glad the format of the album has endured, primarily because I think there's so much that you can do with the journey of a set of songs thematically put together that can't be done through a single song. And songs can have relationships with each other and build upon themes and build upon musical ideas and build upon the sonic identity of an artist without losing that standalone quality of saying, like, this is a good song by itself. And so looking back upon my two albums, I honestly feel very thankful, like that God gave me a gift, and not like I'm gifted, like literally like he put a present beneath the Christmas tree for me with both of these albums, because both of them started out thinking that I would only be able to afford making an EP. Unfall started out with me saying, you know what, like I found a producer I really want to work with, and I want to get more in depth in the Nashville music scene and be, at shows, supporting artists, doing the concert thing more frequently. And so I was like, I would love to just have a few songs to point to saying, hey, like, I do the music thing too. Here's what I do. If you want me to, write with you or play guitar for you or, fill in drums for you, I'm here. So that was really like the thought process behind going to the studio with Zach Lardy from the band Empty Isles, recording the songs Matter, Worth the Wait, and Lonely Saints. And after doing that, I was just showing those three songs to people, trying to figure out like how to release them and kind of what to do with these songs. And just had a few people say like, like this is good, but it's not complete. Like these three songs don't really make sense just by themselves. And Matter in particular, like the people who heard it was like, this is the song. Like this is what you should be doing, Chase. And it just really encouraged me. And so I just like went all out on saving as much money as I could to be able to afford recording another 7 songs. So that I returned to the studio, and rather than like forcibly writing 7 more Matters, I mostly kind of just looked at my back catalog, looked at the few songs here and there that I've written and demoed out over the past few years, and said like, okay, what fits? Like what pieces do I already have that kind of turn these 3 songs into like a puzzle, like kind of treating it my second favorite album of all time, a brilliant concept album called The Earth Sings Me on Me by The Receiving End of Sirens. When they were making that album, they used like a mentality of thinking the perfect songs exist, like the pieces are out there in the universe. We just need to find the pieces and put them together in the correct ways. So without getting like too mystical about it, that's kind of like what I was doing. Like I believe the pieces are here. I just need to find them. And so I had like a long list of like 12 or 13 songs that were in consideration for the album. Brought in a few friends to kind of help narrow down and talk through like, okay, what fits, what makes sense. And then worked on writing some new songs, which is where Unfall and Lovable came from, as the kind of 10th and final song of that album. And I was picking these songs mostly about sonic identity and things that fit together on a genre level, like what makes sense next to Matter. And so it was actually after I was already in the studio, like working on recording these 7 songs, that I realized that I'd kind of accidentally pieced together a concept album. In a sense, it was in the lightest of terms, a concept album, just in the ways that it was building upon a certain musical idea and a certain sound. But in recording the songs, I realized that all 10 songs in one way or another are about isolation. And that really Unfall is a concept album, not in the Wall sense or Earth Sings Me If I'm Me sense, but still in its own way. Thematically, it's all about isolation, which, irony of ironies, gets released right before the quarantine. So that became a pretty special thing to feel like I actually had something to say at the right time that people needed to hear it. So that's that album, at least.
So what does that look like with the new album?
Yeah, excuse me while I take another sip of water.
You've earned it.
Thank you. So the kind of similarly, I went into the studio thinking that I was just making an EP. And the songs that went into Development and Compromise were songs that either were in consideration for Unfall and just didn't fit, or were kind of older songs that I thought kind of deserved the light of day. So I set aside 5 days of studio time with a producer in town that I love and really wanted to work with again. So just paying by the hour rather than paying by song, spend 5 days in the studio recording as much as we could. Like, let's see what happens. Let's see what gets done. And I had these 11 songs kind of ranked by priority of if I can only record 4 songs, which 4 do I want that to be? If I can only record 6 songs, which 6 do I want that to be? And we just kind of paced it out accordingly. And much to my shock and awe, in those 5 days, we were able to record all 11 songs. It was quite the marathon.
That's a miracle.
It was very exhausting. And I was also still working at the time. So I didn't want to, or really couldn't, use like full PTO days from work, because I have a full-time job doing working for a scholarship services company. And so I just took half days. And so that was a really crazy week where I was like waking up at 6, working for 2 hours, going to the studio to record for like 3 or 4 hours, working for another 2 hours, and then going back to recording for another like 4 hours. So it was these very long, exhausting days. But I recorded the drums for all 11 songs on day 1, the bass and acoustic guitar for all the songs on day 2. And then for the next 3 days, we did like guitar, vocal, guitar, vocal, guitar, vocal, knocking out about 3 songs per day. And it was just, it really was crazy. And it was so exciting. It was one of the more fun experiences I've ever had. And there was a lot of kind of symbiotic partnership between me and this producer, Sean Power, who runs the Hilson studio in Antioch, Tennessee. And just like the drum sounds and the guitar sounds we were getting were so great. And his little ideas to just finesse the song slightly here and there were spot on. And, getting to like use like his amps and pedals in the process. It was super great. And, essentially what I went into the studio to make was like a B-sides EP, which I'd been wanting to do from the beginning. Like I really wanted my next album to just be 2020 songs and up, like to be releasing Unfall at the start of the decade. That was supposedly me kind of saying goodbye to the previous decade, releasing my best songs from the preceding decade, and then just moving on. But part of me just couldn't move on. Like I'm writing new material that I love and genuinely think is better than any of the stuff people have heard so far. Like I think my new stuff is on an upward trajectory. But I had these old songs that I just loved and cared about and believed in, and thought like they at least need to have this B-sides EP thing. And then the EP became 11 songs long and was sounding really good. Like, sounding about as good as Unfall, despite, being so much quicker and cheaper, and kind of it was really just more raw. And kind of we went in with very Like we knew exactly what we were doing from the get-go. Like all of the experimentation from Unfall and getting to spend as long as we wanted in studio trying out things and figuring things out, that was all gone. It was 5 marathon days of, like I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm gonna record one guitar and you're gonna pan it hard right. I'm gonna record the other guitar, you're gonna pan it hard left. It's very simple, kind of like just breaking it down to just the core things of like what makes a good rock song. Very much inspired by the Thrice album Beggars, where they do a lot of that, where like literally like you hear Dustin's guitars on one side of the mix, Tepe's guitars on the other side of the mix, and you don't really hear anything else besides bass, drums, lead vocals, and the occasional harmony. Like it was very kind of back to basics in that way. So that was kind of the main inspiration to be able to make an album this quickly. And then I learned so much from Unfall, and like taken so many lessons about song structure and what makes a song click, that all of these songs were rewritten. Like some of these songs are kind of old, but none of them are in their old state. All of them have a 2020 flair to them, kind of a rewrite to them. And also all the songs are shorter than they used to be. In order to record these songs as quickly as possible, I edited them all to just like their just slimmest form, like no repeating choruses, no unnecessary musical interludes, just like bare bones. And so there's a lot of songs that don't even hit 3 minutes, which is very weird for me. Every single song on the album is at least 20 seconds shorter than it used to be in some form, with one song, Fear Not Want, actually being 2 whole minutes shorter than the original version.
Wow.
Yeah. So just like really, really crazy edits were going into this process that I across the board think made for better songs. And then I ended up with these 11 tracks that I really thought, you know what, like I didn't just make a B-sides album. I accidentally just made my second record. And so it was really sitting with them for a while and figuring out like, okay, what connections are here? What themes are here? I basically like, again, kind of had the mentality, like I have the pieces of an album here. What is that album? And so I just had to figure that out and just kind of play with it and put different songs together and see how they fit. And what I ended up realizing is that I had a development half of the album and a compromise half of the album. So it's almost like a double EP in that sense. Like I'm trying to use my Bandcamp sales and pre-orders and getting all the money that comes in from Bandcamp to hopefully fund printing this album on vinyl. And the thought process behind getting it on vinyl is kind of already embedded into the album. Like you have this, so tracks 1 through 7 are the development half, and that would be side A of the vinyl, where the center of that is the song Developments, and it very intentionally starts with Shock My Ears, ends with Madison as like its own kind of closing track, and then you turn it over, and the tracks 8 through 12 are the compromise side of the album, and so it has this big bang opener of Hello Zunico, closer of Wide Side of Content. In the center of that album is a compromise, and so it's very kind of it had these like themes that kind of just fell together. And basically I realized there's a way of interpreting that first half of lyrics as songs that are all about kind of different developments in some way or another. And then that second half, like those songs can all be interpreted to be about some sort of compromise. So like there are lyrical themes there, but then almost on a joking level, but also a real level. There's like a musical element to it as well, where I think the first half of the album makes more sense as a natural development of the sound of Unfall. So like those are the songs that kind of fit more neatly next to Unfall. And then those last 5 songs are where I'm, so to speak, compromising on the sound that I started on Unfall by going in completely different musical directions. So that's kind of the album that I just fell into with this one. And it's really cool because even though it's very different from Unfall in a lot of ways. It's also really similar in a lot of ways. I think both albums have this idea of like starting you somewhere and taking you on a journey and getting you back there. Like if Unfall, like, you know, Matter is like home. It's where you start. And I'm trying to take you on this journey to get back to home, which is Unfall and Lovable. Like two songs that fit very nicely next to each other. They're even like almost the same like tempo and key. Like they, like you could put them right next to each other and they would flow really nicely. It's literally like bringing you back home to these songs that pair nicely together. And in the meanwhile, like you get kind of like these emotional centerpieces on Unfall. That is the middle tracks, Council and Lonely Saints. And I think basically the same thing happens on Development and Compromise, where Home is instead this kind of brash, in-your-face rock of Shock My Ears that takes you on a journey that gets you to these emotional centerpieces of Madison and Hell's and Nico, and then continues you on the journey until it brings you back home with Wired Side of Content, which are both songs that are kind of like wrestling with truth and kind of the lies that we kind of feed ourselves in kind of modern culture. So yeah.
Well, we don't review music here like Jesus Freak Hideout does, but I will tell you that my 5-year-old has overheard me listening to this album, and he has requested Q2FN more than once. And he doesn't request music a whole lot. It's like you and Toby Mac right now. So
man.
You're really high up there on the
That's incredible.
on the ladder.
Maybe I need to start making music for kids, because I have a friend who sent me a video a few days ago. One of the most charming things I've ever seen. It's his, like, I think 5-year-old daughter singing Search for Myself. And apparently, like, she requests to listen to my album basically every day on her ride to school. It's like,
that's awesome.
Melting.
Well, you only need to make 8 more albums before Josh can make a list of Chase Tremaine songs. So you got to get to work.
I'm on my way.
That was our interview with Chase Tremaine. Really love to thank Chase. I've been looking forward to getting along with him, getting together with him. We've been getting along for a while, but we finally got together and had a podcast, and I'm excited about this album. I hope you guys have listened to it already, but if you haven't already, check it out. It's called Development and Compromise. It just released, and it's a great album. If you're into indie rock, it's totally the place for you. Indie rock. Explain indie rock to someone like me that doesn't know what that means. You know, it's kind of a broad term, I guess. But indie rock, I don't really know how to explain it. It's rock and roll made independently, and it can have many faces, if you will. And the perfect thing about that is Chase has a lot of, I mean, there's songs that are mellow, there's songs that have some screaming. I mean, so you're saying there's a song on there for everyone? Yes. Awesome. And this is an album, as we talked about it in the interview, that has like a concept, so you have to listen to the whole way through. You can't just pick and choose. So, and if you want to hear the concept backwards, you can also do that by listening to it in reverse. This is not that type of thing. Oh, okay. But anyway, there's not a hidden message. No. Is there a hidden message, Chase? Is there a hidden message in reverse? I hope not. Holy crap. Okay, Chase, thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited about your music. Your music has, as I discussed in the interview, I listened to Unfall a good deal during when the quarantine first started, and so there's some songs on that album that I really have enjoyed and still listen to, and this album that just came out, Development and Compromise, has a lot of great tracks on it as well. So thank you, Chase, and we are heading off into the sunset. We of course have our Patreon page that you can go and support us. Patreon.com/Decent Christian Talk. If you can't get enough of us on here, we will be talking about the debut of Third Day, and you don't want to miss that. We have an Instagram page, DC Talk Podcast. We are on YouTube. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We are on Facebook and Twitter and all the lovely things. But, hey, if you like what you hear, make sure you share this with a friend, and we would greatly appreciate that.
I agree. And also, if you like what you hear from Chase, not only musically, go check out JesusFreakHideout.com.
Yes, check out the podcast. They've got a lot of great episodes in the archives.
Podcasts, they have articles.
Yes.
I go there all the time. It's really
a great resource.
The forefront of Christian music news, and almost like the Christian music underground that you don't hear about. That's where you find your news. It's JesusFreakHideout.com. It updates you on new releases from almost every possible band, new song. I know I scroll through there every once in a while and I think, oh, wait, this came out January 1st or what, I don't know, whatever date. I go listen to it. So it's how I keep relevant almost with just the music that's coming out.
You're using all the trendy terms, relevant and all that.
I mean, I may or may not have done that on purpose.
Okay. All right. Well, we are heading off into the sunset. We will catch you next time.
Don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses. Thanks.
Don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses. Thanks.